This is Anbernic's RG40XX V. I'm going to go over all the details with this, but this has also been updated this month. So I'm going to show you how to update this, but also what to be careful of when you do that. Starting off with the hardware, this is basically the vertical version of the RG40XX H. What you'll notice is that you get one joystick with this versus two with the H. This is kind of like the bigger version of the RG35XX, but the 35XX had a 3.5-inch screen and no joystick, obviously. So you get a bigger 4-inch screen with this handheld, a joystick, and obviously their build updates. Something else I've noticed about the build quality of the 40XX series is that when you shake them, nothing happens. They're very solid. Whereas with the 35XX series, when you shake them, there's like a button rattle. This also applies to the 35XXH, where this has a smaller screen than this. It has shaky buttons when you shake it. The build quality of this does feel really nice and solid, but like I said, it is much bigger, so if you want to put this in your pocket, it might not fit that well. This is really for someone who wants to take advantage of the bigger screen and the joystick. On the left is where you'll find your SD card with your software and your games on it, and your volume buttons. On the right side, there's a slot for expanded storage on a secondary SD card if you bought that option, but I always recommend just building your own game libraries on your own reliable SD cards. And up here you got your power button and your reset button. The very top has a HDMI mini out, so you can hook this up to your TV. There's also your power indicator lights up here. On the very bottom of the device is your DC/OTG port, which is USB-C. You also have a headphone jack. On the back you'll notice that there's these slots here. It looks like a battery case that you can remove, but you can't, so you'd have to take it apart to replace that. What I like about these triggers is that they're very sleek. You can see that they're very close to the body on the back, and they have this nice angle for your fingers. It's interesting how they designed the plastic on the back to give you that angle with the buttons. If you compare it to the 35XX, you can see that the buttons themselves are shaped to give you that angle. So you can really tell that they're improving the build quality with this, and I just think this looks a lot more sleek. You could remove the battery from the 35XX with this one screw here, but if you look at the 35XXH, you'll notice that they started doing the internal battery thing, so this is harder to get at. But personally, I wish they had kept this design, because this allows you to bring multiple batteries around with you if you're traveling, and you can just switch them out really quick instead of waiting to charge it. But not a big deal for most people, it's just good to know. They do give you a joystick that's bigger, which I really like. It's not sunken down in it where you're trying to like move it around down there. You can see it does stick up pretty far, which is nice, but it's not that much taller than the buttons themselves, so it's not too obnoxious. It seems to be just right. The joystick does click, and you'll see up here in the middle there's a menu button with an M on it. Something else I think that Anbernic gets right with these vertical handhelds is when I put my thumb on it like this, you can see that the speaker is not covered up. I really like that because when I'm playing, it doesn't interfere with the audio. There are some handhelds when you put your thumb on the buttons, your thumb's right over the speaker, and I just find that really distracting, so that's a plus for me. And the speaker being out of the way in my thumb was something I liked on the 35XX as well, so I'm glad that they kept that placement. You'll probably notice that it has the same stock software as the 40XXH, but like I said, I'm going to update this in this video to show you how to do that. The first menu option you have is game rooms. If you go in here, these are just standalone emulators for different systems, but if you go over to the right, this is RA Game, where you can use RetroArch, which gives you a lot more options for your games. So in here, you'll see a bunch of systems that comes on the card. If you have an expanded storage card, you'll have a lot more games. The RGXX series uses a H700 chipset, so you can basically play up to PlayStation 1 just fine, but once you get into like PSP and Nintendo DS and N64 and Dreamcast, for example, you won't be able to play all the games. There might be some games that don't work or are a bit laggy, but one thing you can try is in some of these, for example in N64, when you're in the games menu, you can hit Y to select your core. So these are basically like emulators that you can try out for your N64 and see if one works better than the other. Depending on what software you put on this thing, you'll have different options. It's just they give you these two for the stock software. But if you're interested in another software to use with this, such as MUOS, check out my other videos on that. But some systems like Nintendo DS and PSP, for example, when you go in, you'll notice that there is no cores to choose from. You can only use that one emulator. I'll scroll through this menu pretty slowly so you can see what kind of game systems you get. There's a lot of classics on here that you'd expect, but you will notice some fun things like Homebrew and Pico 8, You can even play some ports on here. So depending on the amount of games you bought with this thing, your ports might be bigger. On this one, we have things like Wolfenstein 3D and Quake, for example. And like I mentioned, in Pico 8, I have 39 games on here. But if you have an expanded games card, you might have more, or you can add your own, obviously. And it's worth mentioning with systems like Super Nintendo, for example. If you go in here, you'll get some awesome games like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time. But if you go up a little bit, you'll notice that there's no Super Mario games. So you won't get all the first party games from Nintendo. That's because they don't want to get in trouble with this. But just as an example, with my one card, I have 415 Super Nintendo games. You'll notice that this is a rainbow color light, but if you want to turn that off or change it, you can just go into your settings and go down to LED settings and then just turn that off. You'll see that there's modes too, so you can have always on, breathe, medium speed, and usually when you choose something like this, you can go back. You can change like the brightness and the colors that you're using. So right now it's on green, and you can really customize that. Another example that I really like is one called Joystick Chasing Lights. You can see that this is blue, and if I move this, it actually detects where the joystick is, which I find really cool. And I mean, if you're speed running and you're really having a good time, you can put it on monochromatic rainbow, and here you go, party mode. But I'll just leave this on multicolor rainbow right now so this doesn't explode. But there's some really useful settings in here on the stock software that you should be aware of, such as your network settings with Bluetooth, your Wi-Fi settings, and even Moonlight, where you can stream games from another device like a PC to the screen and use this as a controller. And if for some reason you completely mess up RetroArch and you want to reset it, you can do that in here as well. And just one more thing that I'll point out that a lot of you might really thank me for later is that if you go down in the menu screen here, you can turn the button sound off. I'm just going to turn this on for a second. Like, nobody should have that button sound on by default, in my opinion. So turn that off. Something else I'll mention that you might want to be very wary of is there is a customized button option in here. So you can see you can customize joysticks and your button layout and stuff like that. But I wouldn't do this if I were you. If I were to customize my buttons, I'd much rather do it in the RetroArch menus. But speaking of RetroArch, there are some button shortcuts that you can use when you're in a game which might help you out a lot. So I'm going to show you those shortcuts now. Let's just go into my old faithful X-Men for Sega Genesis. So when you're actually in a game, what you can do is use this menu button to do shortcuts. So if I hold on this menu button and hit X, I can pause the game and then unpause it. Y will show you your frames per second. B will take a screenshot. And A is not set up for anything at the moment, but you can change all this with the hotkeys menu in RetroArch. If I hit the menu button and hit the right trigger, I can save this game as a save state. And if I hit the left trigger, I can load that state. But you can use multiple states, and if you want to select those, just hold the menu button and hit left and right on the D-pad. And you can see that there's different states that I can choose from. You can choose up to like 1,000, but I'll just leave it at state slot 1. You can also use L2 and R2. So if I hold the menu button and hit L2, I can slow the game down. You can see this little tiny fly thing is just flying by really slowly. Or you can go back to normal speed. If I tap R2, you can see that I'm speeding the game up. So that fly is flying by really quickly now. Or you can just go back to normal. If I hold this and hit my volume buttons up and down, I can change the screen brightness. And if I were to hit start, I would exit the game. But before we do that, I'm going to show you how to turn this Mega Drive overlay off. So if you hit the menu button, you'll bring up the RetroArch quick menu. You can see that up here. If I hit B, I can go back to the full main menu here where you can go into more advanced settings and all that. But if I go back into the quick menu and I go down to on-screen overlay, I can turn that off. And I'll go back and go down to overrides and then save content directory overrides. Or I can just save that as a game override if I just want that off for X-Men. But that's fine, I'll just save this. And then if you go back and resume your game, so you can see now when I'm playing the game, that overlay is not down here anymore. But yeah, you can customize so much stuff in RetroArch. I'll just exit the game now by hitting menu and start. The last thing I'll talk about before we update the software is they do give you an app center. And if you go in here, you can do things like play music, videos, read ebooks. There's also a favorites menu, a history of what you've played, and a search option which people find really helpful. So let's update the software. I will say that the website 2Retro sent me this over for review. If you want 10% off their website, you can use my discount code BATPIXEL. They sell a bunch of gaming handhelds, so check them out. They also sent me this really cool cloth, which I've been using to keep the dust off my screen in this video. They do accept PayPal, and I got some more videos coming up with them too. But yeah, I'll have links down below, and make sure to use my discount code. So to update the software, you have to go to the Anbernic website and go over to firmware update. The first one listed here is the 40XX V. Now you have to be careful about this part. You can see here that this is the 64GB version, and you'll notice that there's no link here for that. And if you go down a bit, you'll see the 16GB version, and there is a link here where you can download that. The reason why is that they're just giving you a software update with the 16GB version, but if you want the games and everything with the 64GB version, you have to contact Anbernic customer service to get a link for that. So just be aware that if you have a 64GB card and you don't want to lose your games or anything like that, make sure you don't download the 16GB version, because that'll just be the software itself. But for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to install the 16GB software. It'll be the same steps whether you contact them for the 64GB or not. And you can see in their note below, it says after writing the 16GB version of the operating system, you will not be able to expand the SD card or install ROMs on the SD card, which basically means this is just going to be the software itself. So let's download this. It'll bring you to a WeTransfer website. Just accept all and then hit download. You'll notice the download is only 2.5GB. That's because it's a zip file, but we're going to extract that and then install it on the SD card. Here's our file that we downloaded. I'm also going to use software called Rufus, which is free, to install this on the SD card. So let's right click on the file and extract it. And in the folder we just extracted, you'll see that there's a second zip file, which is really weird. So I'm just extracting that second zip file so I can get into the software that I'm looking for. Now this is the second folder that we extracted, so if I go in here, I can finally see the disk image file that I need for my SD card. The next step is to make sure your device is powered off, and then just take your SD card out of the side, and you're going to plug this into your computer. So let's open up Rufus. You can see that it's picking up my 64GB card. Make sure you back up all your game files so you don't lose anything no matter what happens. I'm obviously going to lose my games here, but that's fine. I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes. The next step is to select my image file. So I'm going to select that and everything's ready to go. So just click start. It'll warn you that you're going to lose your data on the card. That's fine. We're going to install something new, so just say OK. And it's going to write your image file onto the SD card. Then we'll put our SD card back into our RG40XX V and we'll be good to go. I hope you found this video helpful. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.